Australians of Reddit, what is your great-great-great-great-grandparents' crime? Stole a horse. I guess modern day equivalent of GTA. As my family will tell you, my ancestor was transported for theft of a goose, however they gloss over the fact the goose's previous owner had to be strenuously convinced to relinquish it. Dude stole some bread and now I live on this giant island. My third great grandfather emigrated from Prussia in the 1890s because he, apparently, was sick of the amount of wars Prussia got into. Ball tampering. Edit. Ironman BTW. My great grandmother told me that there were 3 brothers that had a ship and would acquire goods and sell them off for profit. Pirates. They were pirates. Edit 1. So in reading some comments it would make more sense that the brothers were smugglers rather than pirates. Nan did gloss over on their history, and she's long gone now for me to ask her. Edit 2. RIP inbox. Most upvoted comment is about my GGGGG granduncles plundering booty and plundering booties. Called a lord in parliament a mangy cunt. Australia was the right place for him. Frankly. Edit. Oh. Thank you so much for the gold. Excuse me while I go and have a shoey to celebrate. For anyone not clear on what that is, it's a beer drunk out of one's own shoe. Edit 2. People have been doing shoeys long before Daniel R came along. Stole a sack of flour from his aunt's store as a joke. The joke being the sitch is so anal that she would notice one sack of flour missing. She did. He got convicted and sentenced to transportation to Australia. That man was named Henry Cable, was the first convict to be pardoned. He was also the first settler to win a court case, having sued the captain of his transportation vessel for stealing all of his belongings on the journey from England. He ended up owning large swaths of the Botany Bay region and ran a world-class trading company. Now my question is, where the duck did all that fat early settler money go? Bonus. Wikipedia page. Edit cause interest. Here is another link. I can't find any info on his crime other than auto burglary. I seem to remember reading the anecdote about the theft of the flour in a book about him that I believe was written by another ancestor. I don't know what it was called, but if anyone has any more accurate info, I'd love to hear it. Not actually a direct ancestor of mine, but a guy killed the squire's bullock. He was so scared of being deported to Australia that he changed his name slightly, hopped on a boat, and sailed himself to Australia. So when he arrived, he'd be a free man, except the ship wrecked off the coast of Victoria. So he and a few others struggled ashore. In order to survive, he shot a bullock he came across for them to eat. It turned out to be a bullock belonging to the guy who owned that piece of land. Again. Much later, he married that same guy's daughter. They named a street after him. Stealing a jug from a public house in County Cork. One guy was sent for trying to steal the same duck 3 times. Edit. Found the transcript. May not have been the same duck. I read in a family tree book that one of my ancestors stole a pair of silk baby booties. Pretty sure it was from the house she was working at. One Englishman stole bread. One Englishman stole tobacco and a sheep. And one was a feisty Irish prostitute. Stealing a pair of trousers. Sentenced to 7 years transportation. The Old Bailey transcript can be read online, which is pretty cool. His daughter married the son of the town mayor, so I can only imagine the disapproval from the free settlers side of the family. Edit. The other sides of the family all freely emigrated to Australia in the early 1800s. I can find stories about some of them online, including a 5x great uncle who killed himself by looking into the barrel of a shotgun while cleaning it, and a family reunion of 4 brothers 27 years after they lost touch when they emigrated to Australia. One of the brothers posted a monthly ad in the paper asking if anyone had news of the missing brother. A great nephew of my convict ancestor died on the landing of Gallipoli, so it's all very Australian. He stole some clothes worth 40 shillings. Got 7 years for it and sent here. He ended up marrying a convict woman who came over on the Lady Penrhyn, having 13 kids, and killing himself at age 54. He's got his own Wikipedia page and everything. Edit. You can read the article that describes his suicide at the link. I find it quite fascinating to read an account of a suicide in a newspaper from 1818. It didn't occur to me that they would be quite so frank about it back then. But there ya go. Being a sick cunt. Edit. Double gold. Duck mates save your dolarities for dropper insurance. They're extra evil this year. Blew up a British barracks. Irishman. Being Irish was just about enough to get transported. At the time, the colony needed farm labourers. Didn't want to pay the farm labourers. And the English convicts were mostly city people who didn't know anything about crops. Some Irish people were transported without even being charged with any offence. The English made harsh laws against the Irish just to be able to get free agricultural workers. I remember a story from school, social studies teacher, of a very rich Sydney family that traced their family only to find out their convict ancestor got deported for carnal knowledge of a sheep. Find out here, you bunch of convicts. Just type in your surname and find out your great-great-great-grandfather wasn't as great as you thought. Edit. These are just cases from one court in central London. At one point when the ratio of men to women was too high, they went around to a bunch of workhouses and orphanages and took any girl aged 13 and above and shipped them to Australia. They didn't need the excuse of having committed a crime. They were poor and Irish and therefore cattle. I rarely get involved in discussions like this because I have a long family history from both sides of where some people like to draw a line, but fact is fact. Irish were used to populate colonies with a workforce when slavery was outlawed by Britain, which was very progressive for the time. They used other excuses like they were criminals, or in the case of these children they were burdens on the state and marrying them would provide stability for them. A kid from my village was deported for stealing a pie that was cooling on a windowsill. Shipped to Australia, as a kid back then, for a damned pie. Stole a loaf of bread, exported out here and 3 weeks later murdered a guy. Didn't help that he was a Scot. My ancestor that arrived on the 13th Fleet was a stowaway. Bit weird because they did commit a crime that caused them to go Australia, but also they weren't sent to Australia for committing a crime. Made the armor for Ned Kelly. No joke. We have a certificate and everything. He managed to not go to jail though. Alice Wilson, age 29, was convicted at Preston Quarter Sessions in Lancashire in April 1845. Her crime was stealing a half sovereign from John Barnes. One court case appearance stated that the Alice Wilson in question was from Leyland, which is close to Preston. It seems that she was a notorious prostitute and petty thief. She was sentenced to life transportation, but the fresh air of Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania, seemed to do her some good. She married the freeman George Barnes on the 17th of May, 1847. About 18 months after she had arrived in Tasmania as a convict. She was pardoned in October 1854. My so's great-great-great-grandmother stole pewter pots from her employer. I believe this was effectively stealing a beer glass from a pub. However, we also know that the transportees on her ship were given behavior ratings on a scale from very good to very bad. She was given a rating of very bad worst, so she was a bit of a rebel. He stole the Duke of Wellington's Chinese food. Stole money from her mistress, she was a lady's maid, to run away with her lover. He nicked off with the money and she earned 7 years at the women's factory in Tasmania. After being freed, she went back to working as a maid. Then she married, moved to the mainland with her hubby who'd split from the Catholic side of his family, and we've been Melbourne atheists ever since. Her name was Andresen. Jumping off the Prussian merchant ship he was employed on at 14 years old, because Adelaide seemed a better bet. His jewelry shop was raided and they found metal plates to print Irish banknotes. Sentence for life. Tearful letters from young wife got it commuted to 7 years. But she followed him anyway and they stayed here. She stole bonnets and a whalebone corset. 30% of Aussies are immigrants. I have no idea what percentage are first generation Aussie with immigrant parents, but it's probably most of us. So if you go back 3 generations, almost all of us were in a different country. That percentage gets higher every generation you go back. Barely anyone will have 5 generations. My great-grandfather was an illegal immigrant. He was sailing on a ship from Ireland and wanted to jump ship in America. But the captain didn't tell the crew where they were going to avoid too many defections, so when the ship got to Sydney he thought he'd better take the chance to disappear in case the next destination was back home. Turns out the next destination of the ship was America. Ha. My grandfather was a Kiwi. It's a source of great shame to the family. From what I am told he stole an him. That got him sent to Australia in the 1820s. Cheers mate. He was Irish, living in Bristol, so as another commenter mentioned above, it could have just been for his ability to farm. He did go on to own farms in Kingaroy in Queensland that have streets named after our family. Stole a pocketbook as part of an organized pickpocket gang. It wasn't a first offense. Husband's father escaped East Germany at the age of 2. Husband's mother's ancestor stole a hat and was transported. Me? My crime was to marry an Australian. One was a young girl from London who nicked off with another girl's clothes, which wouldn't have been such a crime except the other girl was still wearing them at the time. The other was an 18-year-old Irish boy who was just marked down as a pickpocket. Eyebrows partially meeting. Stole, I think, 17 horses. Christ knows how he managed that, but here we are. Cow hunting. In India, British Raj was still in effect, so he was given 48 hours to leave the country. He'd have been torn to pieces by the local populace had he stayed. First ship available was headed to Australia. Political prisoners, given the offer of being hanged or transported to the colonies. Lucky they choose to the cruise ship option. Irish. He was busted in England pretending to be an Anglican priest. At the time he was official chaplain to the Earl of somewhere, don't remember, who was fourth in line to the throne. He'd officiated many upper class marriages, which technically were therefore invalid. Rather than out him, they trumped up charges of forging stamps and sentenced him to 7 years transportation to the colony. Now, they didn't inform the captain of the ship as to the true nature of his crimes. He came to the captain en route and offered to start a school for the children on the ship for the 2-month voyage. When they arrived in New Sydney town, Governor Macquarie saw from the ship's manifest this man of the cloth on a relatively minor charge who, according to the ship's captain, had contributed admirably through the journey. With the lack of clergymen in the colony, he was summarily pardoned. He went on to start a school in Sydney town that still exists today, Sydney Grammar School, one of our most prestigious. Crazy life. All this only came out when a history major at Sydney Grammar decided to do his thesis on our glorious founder. The large painting hanging in the school lobby, tracked back through shipping records and historic English records becoming available at the time. I can only imagine how satisfying that would have been to submit. He also fought in the Battle of Trafalgar, and, here's his wiki page. Was a lemon stealing whore. A stolen loaf of bread followed by the theft of a pocket watch. He was also tried for being cruel to a horse a few years after he arrived in Australia. Sounds like a bit of a cunt, really. My mother, British, used to always tease my father, Australian, for being a criminal. But after doing family history, it turned out she was the one with a criminal relative shipped out to Australia. The person in question was birthed in prison. The mother having stolen a candle and coal. She was desperate. She died and he didn't really stand much of a chance, caught for similar reasons. He did end up making a life for himself in Australia. My third great grandfather stole a timepiece. You'd think it was a watch, right? No, the town clock. My third great grandmother stole an oven. Reach for the stars, and you land among the colonies. Or maybe this question could be asked. How did your great scam the justice system so that they would be transported to that lovely and lucky country, Australia? Otherwise, was your grandparents one of the post-war cute 10 poms? My grandfather did a bunch of research on ancestry.com and the like. The family on my father's side was originally sent to prison and then Australia for being part of a money counterfeiting ring in South England. I can't remember the town. Apparently they were apprehended with fake molds at a train station. They eventually earned land from good behavior and then freedom due to being top-notch farmers. I'll add that, much to my grandfather's displeasure, we're mostly of Irish heritage who moved to England. For his whole life he thought he was old blood English and enjoyed the light-hearted jokes against the Irish. He's since stopped that. Strangely enough, simultaneously highway robbery and inappropriately hitting on the ladies. Not an Australian, but my great uncle was Thomas Francis Marr. He was convicted of being an Irish rabble-rouser and sent to Australia. He later stole a ship after notifying the authorities that he would be escaping, sailed to New York, fought in the Civil War, and was appointed territorial governor of Montana. That side of my family has lived in Montana ever since. I asked a friend of mine this. There was no crime. His great-grandparents were tired of Rainy Island, so they left for Australia. They ended up in a mining town. Rather than start the back-breaking work of mining, they opened a bar and made sure the miners had plenty of booze to drink and made a bunch of dollary-doos in the process. Shot a hare on a lord's property somewhere near Cork. I haven't figured out what my dad's side did, but it would be something minor like that too. I'm about 90% Irish, so I definitely have several other ancestors that were forced to come here for small crimes. Caught drinking the liquor he was meant to be delivering. Pretty much sums up my dad's family too. Harriet Neat, transported at the age of 15 for stealing handkerchiefs, and Joseph Solomon, transported with his brother Jodha for criminal enterprise. Fun fact, the Solomon brothers were the inspiration for Fagin. No really a crime, but, well, here's the thing. Some 110-120 years ago, my country was under the yoke of the Ottoman Empire. They, the army, were systematically going from remote village to remote village, in an extreme winter where food was in very short supply, offering a bag of rice flour to those who would convert their religion from Christianity to Islam. Many villagers were starving and had no way to feed their families, so many did take them up on that offer. Now, villagers then lived in like these connected houses with a yard, usually several brothers together, so when the asker, Turkish word for military, arrived in my great-great-great-grandfather's village, many followed suit. His brothers were like, "Dude, we are surely going to die if we don't do this." My GG grandpa didn't reply. He just got out, took the axe from the log and stood in front of the door. He then said, "Anyone who is willing to go and take their offer is free to do so. He will just have to go through me." Neither went and were still Christian, while 90% of the village inhabitants converted. Now, this isn't a hate towards Muslims or anything. I just found it superb and a story I really like and wanted to share. Stole a loaf of bread. Got off early after he tracked and found a bunch of cattle that went missing. Was gifted a plot of land that is now a fairly major town. I still haven't been there. I want to, so I can stand there with my hands on my hips to say my family made this town. Not really. Having a drink in the local pub might be nice though. Drunk history? Edit. First Fleet. Stealing the uniform she had on when she left the job she was working. If you read between the lines, the implication is that she quit and left in a hurry, and her employer had her arrested for theft, despite likely leaving and returning to that job in her uniform daily. My great-great-grandfather fought a duel in the Netherlands and afterwards fled to the Dutch East Indies and then Australia, as dueling was illegal. Me? I'm just happy he won. Throwing a man into a furnace and yelling, "I'll show you just how real the flames of hell are." He was a priest. He stole a spoon, went on a cruise across the sea and then shacked up with indigenous women, whom he owned. Eventually yours truly came along and now I'm shacking up with an English woman. It's the circle of life really. My great-great-grandfather wasn't a convict, but he had to flee New Zealand for stealing a signal cannon off a sunken ship and using it to blow down his neighbor's door. His neighbor was French, so apparently he deserved it. Stole something. Can't remember what. He only got 10 years, but when he got back to England, he found that his wife had died. So he packed up his 5 kids and took them back to Australia to start a farm. Apparently had some adventures. There's even a newspaper story talking about him getting speared by Aborigines. Do all others think we're all born from convicts? Thinking 3rd generation German immigration from my mother's side, and my father was the first and only of his family born north from England and Ireland. None are criminals. Edit. That I know of, or sent here as punishment. Better question is, what was the current Prime Minister's great-great-great-grandparents' crimes were? He was transported from Ireland for being a white boy. Edit. WTF downvotes? Some of them committed the horrible crime of being Aboriginal Australians. After killing a midshipman, writing 2 6-volumes of poetry, falsely claiming to have been ordained, serving as a Navy chaplain on the Britannia, interfering in a duel between 2 officers, and finally performing a number of illegitimate marriage ceremonies, resulting in a lot of unexpected bastard children. He was finally shipped off, rather quickly, on the pretense of forging money rather than marriage certificates to avoid too much public knowledge about said bastard children, to Australia. Immediately on arrival he was granted a ticket of leave and shortly thereafter went on to found Sydney's first and arguably still most prestigious private school, 1825, which still stands on the same land today, with several of the original buildings still in use. England tried to shut him down, but he had the direct personal support of Governor Lachlan Macquarie. I have no idea how he got so many chances, especially after all that poetry. He came across on the Second Fleet as a free citizen as an assistant surgeon and was the richest person in the colony when he died. Legitimately migrating to South Australia as a free settler, the worst crime of all. Stole a pound of bacon to get transported with the hope of tapping into the burgeoning opportunities in the colonies. Didn't work, so served time and upped the ante on release by stealing some silver forks, which got the job done. Transported to Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania, with a 7-year term of hard labour. Upon arrival on the docks in Hobart Town, was identified by a landowner as a strapping young lad with evident leadership potential. Yes, the genes persist. So avoided the hell of Port Arthur and became an overseer on a property. Became a free man and may or may not have shacked up with an underage girl, which wasn't frowned upon in those days as there were few women in the colonies. 3 generations later, his descendant was the superintendent of police for the northern part of the state, commended for rounding up a gang of cattle rustlers. Assist rare. This has got to be one of the most fun AskReddit posts I've ever read, lol.